Welcome to another episode of Off-Plan and Investments Unplugged 2, the segment of our podcast where we answer your questions about property investment. I'm Simon Baker, Managing Director here at Haus, and I'm joined once again by Rennie, Off-Plan and Investment Manager. Today, we're going to talk about how to resell an off-plan property. So thanks for joining me today, Rennie.
Thank you.
So yes, we just kick straight on. I mean,
let's do it.
The benefits of selling before completion is one note I've got here, I guess, versus potentially selling once the property's finished.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on, obviously, I guess it comes into payment plans and that kind of thing?
Yes, very much so.
What would you think on that front?
It's something that a lot of clients seem to do now, probably more than we've seen probably the previous years. And I guess a lot of that is due to the capital appreciation that we've seen in the last coming years, and what we're predicting to see in the next coming years as well. So something is probably a little bit more tied down to a good payment plan. And when we say good, that usually means the least amount you pay before handover and the larger amount on completion itself, leaving the most amount of return on your capital investment, if you like.
Sure. Okay, that's quite important, isn't it? And I guess can get a little bit complicated when it comes to the maths of it.
It can.
I've always been quite like numbers, but of course, and what you mean by that is obviously that the less you paid, there is usually a minimum we should mention. So typically that is 30 to 40%. Is that still the case?
In some cases 20, usually hard to find, but 30, 40, you'll be doing really well. Some developers can often be quite a bit higher.
Okay, so 30 to 40% until you can get an NOC to resell the properties. That's very important. So
Indeed.
You do need to be correctly advised by a broker. I do think that property is always going to be at least a mid to long-term investment, and being able to make those payments, I would always say at least 50%. You know that you can then potentially finance the other 50%. So if the market was to slow down and it was a bit harder to sell, then you would have a backup plan, should we say? Even if the original plan was to flip to make capital growth. And then, so then ultimately, if you plan to make those 50% payments, if you're selling and you've only paid 50%, obviously we talk about premiums and the premium of the total price. So let's break it down for someone listening. So let's say it was $1 million dirham property, and let's say you paid 50%, and it was only 500,000 dirhams. Any profit you make of the million is all on that payment plan, and then after paying any 50% is effectively double, isn't it?
Correct, absolutely. And we've seen a lot of developments or a lot of projects that we've launched in the last couple of years where people have been able to do exactly that. And those are the kind of hidden gems that we'd often advise clients on. Again, going back to what you said, not on the sole basis of being able to flip, so to speak, but really exploiting a very attractive payment plan and having that opportunity to at least look at selling it on and getting a really healthy return on your capital, whilst maintaining that if for whatever reason we don't reach those dizzy new heights, you've still got a really solid investment.
Yeah, and I think that's really sensible, isn't it? The idea of, certainly from when I first started working the market here, maybe 2005, 2006, sounds like a long time ago for some people.
Probably is.
But it's quite a long time ago. There were people who would potentially be buying a property, they'd pay 10%, and then they'd be like, oh no, I don't have any more money, I can't pay any more. Obviously, we would advise all of our buyers to make sure you're in a position that, worst case, you have a backup plan you can finance. If you can pay 50% over a period of, let's say, a year and a half, and you could finance the other 50%, that sounds a bit more of a sensible, long-term view, I hope, doesn't it? In terms of diving into those numbers that we just discussed, so just to reiterate that, if you'd bought the $1 million dirham property, let's say it went up 20%, and that you've made 200,000 dirhams, but on the back of the 500,000, that's actually a 40% return on capital. And this is suddenly where you can start talking about interesting numbers, isn't it? Absolutely. People get excited about.
Exactly. And another way, some investors would kind of stick around in the ROI sort of market, if you like, and buy maybe a ready property and talk about the idea of getting, let's say, average, maybe 7% ROI. Whereas a lot of these really good projects, you might see appreciation of 7 to 10% a year. So rather than putting all your money in an investment, tying up your whole 1 million dirhams for 21% over 3 years, you could ultimately earn that whilst only paying half the amount, so to speak, on capital appreciation.
No, 100%.
So there's loads of different ways you could do it, but that's another way where you can make a good percentage at least.
Sure. No, and there are different strategies, aren't there? I do think that, obviously estate agents probably in the past have maybe got a bad reputation for encouraging buyers to, don't buy one of these, buy 3 and we'll sell them all. And we've heard some ridiculous claims in the market where people will say, oh, you can double your money and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's quite unfair, really, which obviously quite understandably earns estate agents a terrible reputation, doesn't it?
It doesn't help us, no.
That doesn't help at all. And there are plenty of people who understand the market, a lot more sensible, understand what products they're picking for their customers. And I think that's so important to make sure that you are dealing with the right person who you trust. I guess building a relationship with an estate agent you trust, who's been in the market a long time, that will be there, for
absolutely on the other end
in a 5 years time, right?
Absolutely.
If I was trying to find a builder for a house, I'd want to find someone who I could have a conversation with in 5 or 10 years. So someone who's been here for a long time, been through and done it, and certainly a company that's been here for 10 years plus. To make sure that you are dealing with someone who will be here in another 10 years and will be prepared to stand behind their promises, basically.
Couldn't agree more.
I think that's really, really important. Obviously, in terms of actually the physicality of selling a unit, you need an agent, I guess, again, don't you? After you bought it, maybe off plan, maybe direct, or maybe for an estate agent. But reselling it, you almost certainly need an agent.
You do, and not just reselling it, whether you want to rent it out, whatever you choose to do with the investment thereafter. I mean, I'd argue, and again, maybe a little bit biased there, but I'd argue from the get-go, when you're purchasing off plan, you'd want to align yourself who's got that long-term view that they can look after you later on. It almost, kind of blows my mind almost, where people would often purchase a property with a company or even with a developer, so to speak, who aren't going to be able to service them in 2-3 years' time when circumstances may change, right? You may need to liquidate, you may decide that you want to gift it, or whatever that case may be. These inevitables, is something that you need to encounter, or at least give some forethought when you're purchasing originally. So,
no, for sure. I think on that, obviously, there are a lot of real estate companies in Dubai that just do off plan, for example. And I love off plan. I love dealing with investments, but at the same time, real estate it's real, isn't it? And hopefully, at some point, these off plan properties will become properties that need managing. They need holiday letting or long term rentals, or they need an estate agent to sell it for them. And obviously, having someone who can have a large resale team with area specialists would be the right approach, wouldn't it? 100%. I've got another note here. Should you buy a property with no intention? That was a question. Should you buy a property with no intention of paying the full amount?
It's probably not the wisest idea to do it going into it, but we've definitely seen it happen. I think if you kind of buy a property, and I might be even guilty of it, where you're purchasing a property where you're like, well, I can deal with that problem a little bit later. I probably can work it out, but I like the idea of being able to sell it, and I'm very confident I'll be able to do so. But it's almost, well, if I need to, as you said before, if I need to have a backup plan, I can muster the payment together, or I can get finance against it. But I think if you're going into this with 100% certainty that I'm not going to be making the next payment.
It's probably not the right approach.
I'm trying to sell it based. I had a client not long ago saying, I want to pay 20% and I want to literally do a back-to-back, so to speak, where I'm paying 20%. Let's sell it to somebody a month later. And I think it goes back to your days in the
there has been times, isn't there, where and if you know the market very well, you could look at something and be confident. I've done it a few times. You can be confident to say, I can buy that and I could probably sell it that evening or the next day. It doesn't even matter on the market too much. It's about what you're buying it for. And
absolutely.
If that property represents fantastic value for money, is undervalued, should we say, in the current market.
Correct,
then, and we touched on it earlier, didn't we, where you could potentially get finance. That's a backup plan B maybe, but at least it's available. Or
you need to know.
I think as long as you can pay that 50%, I think as a minimum, you should always think that. I think if you're trying to buy something and pay 10 or 20% with a view to flipping it, I think you should be a bit careful. I'm not sure that's necessarily a sensible approach. You might get burnt and
agreed. And I think lose that money. I couldn't agree more. And I think that sentiment seems to be available a lot more now. Usually in a kind of healthy market where there's a lot of interest from all over the world, and now I've seen it more so with developments like in Ras Al Khaimah, where, obviously the introduction of the casino, and it's got a lot of hype around it. Now people are asking the question whether they can buy today and literally sell within 6 months. And I think it is ludicrous to hear some agents actually promising that they're going to double the money in such a short space of time. But has it got growth to it? Probably, yes, but you need to give it the test of time. I think selling anything without at least not letting it mature for 24 months is
no, sure. And I think we're as optimistic as the next person, aren't we?
Absolutely.
But at the same time, if you've got an estate agent promising you they're going to double your money, maybe look into how long have they been in the country for? How long has their country been around? A company been around for? A country been around for? How long has their company been around for? How and do they have a resale team? I mean, so actually, sometimes the funny thing is, you listen to a developer telling you that their rent, you can rent, I think there was someone was saying earlier, the other day that their property was 14%.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have a rental team, so they haven't got any way of proof backing that up.
Absolutely.
We have a rental team of 70 people sat in the next door office who will rent your property for you.
Yeah.
But because we are going to do it, I'll be honest with someone. And we're building a relationship with you for the next 10 years, hopefully. And that's not something that I would take lightly at all. And I'd be very honest and, and say that optimistically you might get this, but realistically it might be this, and worst case it might be this. And you've got a good range of numbers to base your investment on then. I think it's
agreed.
Quite fair. Benefits of waiting until handover. So someone asked, what would be the benefit of waiting all the way until handover rather than, let's say, someone early on, if you could get 10 or 20%, what would be the benefit to wait another year till it's just ready for handover?
So if you look at the cycle of appreciation during the course of construction, say for example it's a great project, we'd usually say if it's something that is quite exciting, we'd say maybe somewhere between 7 to 10%, maybe you could see appreciation. Now, in the first kind of year, you get X amount, second year, and as you draw closer and closer to handover, you usually see the biggest appreciation. Now, just before handover itself, I'd argue you see maybe the biggest spike just towards the end, because now you've actually opened up a completely different market of buyers, where buyers who need to leverage with a mortgage have now got access to that property, which otherwise they couldn't have maybe 6 months before. You're typically talking about end users who, again, have maybe more a vested interest in the property. It might be lifestyle, might be close to the kids' school. So many more reasons why it's a compelling argument for they need to have that property versus a want, which obviously someone who has a need will always spend a little bit more. Therefore, that's when you get the highest appreciation.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, obviously, and you touched on it there anyway, but just to reiterate the point of financing, the person, let's say for certainly some of the more aggressive payment plans, I mean, even 50-50 is a lot of money, isn't it?
To having cash
but some of the developers, I mean, your EMARs and some of the big government developers are now asking for 80 or even 90% during construction. So what that means is you need to be fairly cash rich to be able to buy this property, or you basically need 100% of the value. Now, as soon as that's ready, as almost from a mortgage perspective, and obviously we can always help you with a mortgage if that's what you need, but from a mortgage perspective, up to 5 million dirham, you can get 80% loan to value, and sometimes you can even finance the fee, so you could potentially get almost 85% loan to value. So suddenly, as you mentioned, the market's really opened up to the fact that an normal end user who's got their deposit saved up could go and buy that property. Once the building completion's issued, the handover notification's issued, and the valuer can get inside and go and have a look, you can go and achieve that mortgage amount, which previously some people you might see a beautiful off-plan property, but if you haven't got the 50% in cash, it wouldn't be achievable, right?
Exactly that.
I guess that's where that appreciation jumps up.
100%, and I'm dealing with that in real time at the minute. I've got a client who wants to purchase a particular property. The completion is not till probably March. She wants to purchase it today, but unfortunately doesn't have the finance available to pay the seller plus the resale costs and what have you that are involved. So it almost rules them out until completion. So it's a big one.
Yeah, I remember doing that many years ago and thinking I found a house price, and then of course during that probably maybe less than 6 months, probably 3 or 4 months, the seller went, hang on a second, I'm going to get a mortgage buyer, and it went up by 300,000 back, almost 10% I think it was, which potentially, which is a bit of a nasty shock, but it's great if you're the investor. It's as you touched on, it's great. It's a great potential return. Obviously, you need help with a decent agent to make sure that whoever's handling your resale, and from a conveyancing perspective, a lot of estate agents in Dubai don't even use conveyancers still. But from a conveyancing perspective, which is having a bit like having a solicitor either side of the UK, is to make sure that they know how to handle it so that the developer gets paid, the unit access, you get access to the unit, all these things. I mean, it is more complicated than just clicking your fingers. It does. It's a bit of specialism, doesn't it?
It is, and but there's so much value in being able to, if you can wait that test of time and get close to handover, you definitely benefit from it from a seller's perspective, or an investor, whatever you see fit, I suppose.
Brilliant. Well, it's been really insightful. Thank you for your time today, Rennie. Pleasure. I think we've hopefully answered a few questions. And if anyone's got any more that you would like us to answer or get in touch direct, please do. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.